Hi, and welcome to the Journey to CEO Success. I'm your co host, Melissa Saunders, and I'm joined by Patrick Tian, award winning serial entrepreneur, renowned CEO coach, and best selling author, recognized by the Wall Street Journal, USA Today, and Amazon. Patrick's latest book, The Journey to CEO Success, is a #1 Amazon bestseller and the inspiration behind this podcast. Patrick, it's a great day to see you.
Thank you very much, Melissa. It's great to be here.
And today we're joined by Jenn Miller, co-founder of People Solution Group and a strategy execution consultant for Rhythm Systems. With more than 30 years of experience, Jenn helps growing companies build strong people foundations through culture, employee engagement, and fractional HR support. She is passionate about helping leaders create workplaces where people thrive, priorities get executed, and companies grow with confidence. Sounds easy, huh? I'm glad to have you here, Jenn.
Thanks, Melissa. It's really nice to be here.
Take a few minutes and tell us about what you're doing right now, your company, People Solutions Group. What kind of challenges do you tackle? What are you doing right now?
Yeah, Patrick. So we usually go into the messy. Like we like the companies that have hit a wall and said, uh-oh, like we need help with our people's stuff. So that could be everything from HR operations. I have a team who will help do payroll and some of the more compliance stuff to the things that I love, which is assessing, do you have the right people on the bus? How's your team getting along? And then making sure that they've got the goals and the people kind of marching to the same beat of the drum. So I love what I get to do and I love the flexibility of it, the different clients. I work a lot in the tech space, but I also have a couple nonprofits and even a manufacturing company. So it's a lot of fun.
Yeah. We partner well too, Rhythm Systems and you guys. And I think we partner really well because what I've learned, and I think you talk about this in your work as well, that execution without people alignment, lots of friction, right? But execution with good people alignment, you get good results. So that's why Rhythm and People Solutions, I think it works well together because you need
Oh, 100%.
good people stuff. Otherwise, you can't execute well.
Agree. Yeah. I will say that I'm a big fan of Gallup, and I know you are. But they have
Yes.
definitely proven that if the people don't understand when they get out of bed why they're there and what they do and how what they do connects to the bigger picture, you don't get engagement, right? And I think that's what Rhythm does, which is so perfect for what we do.
So let's talk about your journey. This podcast is all about helping our CEOs have a more joyful and successful life. And over the years, I've met so many CEOs who have the success, but not the joy. And I've been trying so hard in the last couple of years to bring those two together. And so let's talk about your journey because you have lots of joy and success. And tell us about your journey. Like, where did you start? Were you always in HR?
Yes and no. So I started in HR, huge company, worked for Lehman Brothers, got very lucky in that job that the woman that I kind of came in under had made some mistakes. And so I got promoted quickly and had an amazing experience learning HR. But my dad passed away. And so I needed to move
Mm.
back home. And I took kind of a jog in my career, but I look back and sometimes I think those jogs are the best things that could ever happen. Ended up working for Lens Crafters and managed 12 stores. And I think that experience, Patrick, actually like boots on the ground, managing sales, managing operations,
Yeah.
having a P&L, right? Like I think that helped me so much that when I made the jump back into HR, it made me a better practitioner because I understood it from the leader's
So,
perspective.
so that actually gave you a lot of, like you said, boots on the ground. Like, I think that's why it appears to me like you really understand the challenges that some of these business leaders face because you've actually faced them yourself.
Yeah, it was interesting because I can't say that I loved being a sales leader and having to hit a number, but I will say that I understand that pressure, right? And so when I'm
Yeah.
working with a leader and they're frustrated and they're angry, I think it makes it easier for me to be empathetic to where they're coming from rather than being like the, true HR person. And I think it also gave me a perspective where I understand that what I do needs to impact the business. It can't just be a program to do a program.
And what you just said there, what you do as an HR leader needs to impact the business. That's actually a pretty unique perspective because I've worked with a lot of HR leaders. I haven't heard very many say that. I've had a couple say that. A couple have said to me, hey, HR really needs to be a business partner to the business. Then also, majority of the HR leaders I know are more focused on compliance, which is all important, by the way. But it appears that you are very focused on like talent growth and people development.
Yeah, I think it's really important. what I've seen, especially I think you felt it at Century One, I know I did, is once you've experienced having an amazing team that's aligned and truly functions at the level that you've never experienced before, you can see how easy business can get done. And the policies are there to support that, but they shouldn't overshadow that. And so I think it's taken me a long time in my career to kind of navigate and figure that out. But once I started figuring it out, and then since experiencing it at Century One, I really just want to help leaders replicate that.
Let's come back to your personal journey
Yeah.
because that I find it very interesting. So you found your way back to HR. Why did that happen? And how did you figure
Yeah.
out that what you want to do?
I found myself really drawn to like the development of my team when I worked for in retail and not really the sales side. And so the more I kept being drawn to that, the more I was like, I think I really belong in human resources. So I made a pivot and got lucky and met somebody through that business that pulled me back into recruiting. And so then I basically like bounced around to all the functions of HR for a while in big companies. And so I learned from the ground up. Every area of HR I was exposed to in large companies, which I think, ended up really paying off, especially now. But I did hit a wall at some point where I really didn't love having to do employee relations in big companies because you
Hmm.
didn't know the people, right? They were numbers. And if that, you definitely didn't know their families. And I had a really good mentor say, I think you'd like HR again if you went to a small company. And I'm so glad I listened. So I made the jump, went to work for a smaller company and fell in love with HR all over again. And
So what were
I
the
think
key
it was really
ingredients that
special.
help you? What were the key ingredients that help you fall in love with HR all over again?
Yeah, I think, I went to work for a company where I got to know the employees, their families, their kids, what motivated them, what excited them. And I started understanding when you do HR that way, you have an impact, right? Like you
Hmm.
get to like understand that, that the majority of your employees are tired because they're working two jobs. And then you get to solve for that. Where if you're working for a big company, you don't get to see those problems up close and personal. And it makes it so much harder to be proactive versus reactive. And I feel like in a big company, you're pretty reactive, but when you're in a smaller company, you can be so much better
Yeah.
at executing the people side.
Right?
Yeah, I definitely felt it when Century One sold to Solar Winds. I found myself back in a big pool,
Yeah.
but I immediately wanted to know people, right? Like, so I
Yeah.
did HR a little different than I did it previously for sure. It was a different approach once I found myself back at Solar Winds.
So even at SolarWinds, you were able to get involved with people, right? I guess the point I'm trying to make is that these were lessons
Yeah,
you learned, and that maybe it was easier to learn them at the smaller firms, but you brought them to the bigger firms. And so I guess what I'm saying is Jan Miller in a small firm or a big firm, you've really learned these key lessons and you're applying them. So you probably connect with
100%.
people regardless of the size of company.
Yeah, I think it's one of the things that I did early on, but I don't know that I did it in a way that I was strategic about it. But now I understand that building that relationship with people and having that level of trust is magic. And I look back at that team at Century One. I've never worked with a team that trusted each other so much, right? And I
Mm.
know that there's a million leadership books that talk about trust, but once you've experienced it and you see it up close and personal, you understand what can happen when leaders trust each other that way.
So how do we do that at Century One? Like how do we get to that point? Now, I'm a fan of Patrick Lencioni's five dysfunctions of a team, and all these
Yeah.
different tools you can use to improve teamwork, etc. Team health, I should say. So what actually worked at Century One that we can take away to create a better team?
Yeah, I will give Greg a huge shout out. Like, I inherited an incredible group of people that were kind of the core. And so all we did is kind of tap into that core and figure out, okay, how do we replicate that? And I think hiring, you nailed it earlier, Patrick. Like, if you don't spend a lot of time making sure that you have the right people, you can't build that trust, right? You have to have the right kind of people that are going to be willing to work together, be open to feedback, And so we worked really hard to make sure, first and foremost, that the people we were hiring were those kind of people and the kind of people who were okay with not having the answer, but going to find the answer because that was kind of who Greg was. And so I think that's key. But I think once you have that, then you have to have great leaders. So we had a great CEO and Bob, and then Greg as the founder, who worked really hard to create environments where we were allowed to challenge and allowed to give each other tough feedback. And I think Rhythm gave us that framework to do it. I know you talk about the spicy conversations, but we lived the spicy conversations in
Yeah.
meetings. But I think it's because the environment, I've been in other companies that frankly think that they're allowing that. But then after the meeting, somebody's upset with somebody because they had a spicy conversation. And that just didn't happen at Century One. And if it did, we resolved it quick. Like we would chase each other down and be like, whoa, 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 like let's resolve this now. So we just didn't
Yeah.
let things fester.
Gotcha, gotcha. So you shared some very good, like some real nuggets for our CEOs to really think hard about. Because every group I've ever worked with, they always think they have the best team. And I'm not saying that they don't. I guess maybe I am saying that they don't. But we always think that we all say, "Hey, we have the best team." But what you're sharing with me is like, here's some characteristics we should look for, or some principles we should live by. If we really want the team to function well with high team health, that really leads to getting things done. So having spicy conversations, being open
For sure.
to feedback, looking for solutions. Don't feel like you have to be the one that has the solution. Clearing the air quickly, right? If you
For
see
sure.
something that isn't working, or if I've offended you in the meeting, let's go clear the air quickly after the spicy, because sometimes spicy hurts, right? I mean, even though
Yeah.
we say, "Hey, let's do spicy," but sometimes spicy does hurt, right? I mean, we're all human, so that happens. What else did I
Yeah.
miss? Is that the core pieces of
I think that's a
Mhm.
big thing. I mean, I think I see sometimes with CEOs and Patrick, similar to you, I'd probably calling a few out, but I do think that sometimes they don't allow the space for those conversations to happen because it makes them uncomfortable. And I will give
Mm,
Bob credit. Like he sometimes would call it out. He sometimes would make it happen. And if it was happening, he'd allow the room for it to happen. So I do think as a CEO, they have to settle into being okay with good conflict, and that
yeah.
good conflict is what builds a great team. And then how you handle that on the other side is where that trust is built.
Yes, I loved working with Bob. I gotta get him on this show. Bob hasn't been on this
You
podcast.
do need to get him on the show.
Yeah, yeah. But
Yeah.
but Bob was when I worked with Bob, he really exemplified what you just said. He was very open to feedback. He wanted to learn. He was not shy about asking how he could improve himself.
Yeah. And I think it created a space where we all were the same way because he was like that. And so I don't think that any of us were people who thought we were perfect. And those spicy conversations allowed us to tell each other when we weren't perfect. So it helped create an environment where we were all kind of trying to improve. He asked me to do an international expansion. And I think this is where Bob is different than a lot of the CEOs I've ever worked for. And I remember walking in his office and saying, Bob, I've never done international HR, right? And he goes, Yeah, go figure it out. Like, and it was like, what? And I mean, and he just had this level of trust that he displayed to all of us. I mean, he certainly would inspect and every week ask me how I was doing on that project. But the freedom to be able to go learn it or to go figure it out allowed us all to come back and say, Hey, I'm afraid to do this. And he was so encouraging about go try it. It's okay.
That's wonderful. That's wonderful. So,
Yeah.
you've been through so many acquisitions, fast growth, organizational transitions. Companies are moving fast, and sometimes systems or people don't catch up. What are the early warning signs that you can say, "Hey, this is what we see, and therefore what we have to do to solve that"?
Yeah, it was interesting. I was on a company yesterday and I was talking to one of their leaders and she's like, My calendar is full. I don't have time to work. I'm like, Oh, red flag. So I asked right away, I was
Mm,
like, Do you guys have goals? What are your goals? When systems and operations don't catch up, the people are feeling it in the fact that they feel overloaded and overworked because they don't know what they're allowed to say no to or where they're allowed
yeah.
to say no. And I think when you have rhythm and you have those goals and you're really specific about what people need to get done and you're able to prioritize and you don't feel like, as she described it, as a tidal wave, but you don't feel that tidal wave every day of just having so many things to do that you can't even function.
So is your schedule being overloaded and the person feeling like they're overloaded a function of them not prioritizing? Is that what I'm hearing? That they didn't know what they should say yes to and what they should no to, and that's why schedule's not overloaded. Now we can't think. By the way, whenever that
Yeah.
happens, I've seen people actually get proud of that, right? Like sometimes I've seen
Yeah.
people say, "I am so busy." It's like it's a wonderful badge of honor almost. Like I'm working my
And
butt
that,
off. I'm so busy. Blah 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 blah. Uh, but they're not thinking anymore, right? Because 'Cause they're overloaded. So that's one of the
yeah,
early signs. Okay. What else?
a hundred percent.
What else other early signs do you see that we should be aware of?
I think the other big thing is that people don't know where to get the answers. So like I was on another company today, we were working on trying to put together an engagement team, and they said, we want to have a channel so that people can get quick answers. And
And
it was a great idea for the engagement team, Patrick, right? But it did make me kind of after the call the CEO and say, okay, let's talk about this. Like, why can't people get quick answers? So I think when people can't get the information that they need, then the structure is not there. And so I think those are probably the two big ones, right? If people feel overloaded or they can't get what they need to get unblocked or unstuck so that they can get things done in the manner that they should.
no, sometimes when people can't get unstuck or unblocked, let me ask it a slightly different way. Sometimes it's not
Yeah.
because they overload. Sometimes it's unfortunately because the leader that they're working for isn't doing the hard work of getting them unblocked, right? Because I've always thought that part of the job of a good leader or manager is to ask this question of their team members: Hey, where are you stuck? Who's in your way, making your life
Mhm.
difficult? Maybe you can't move that boulder, but I can. And it's my job to move that boulder. I see
Yeah.
this more in the bigger companies where, unfortunately, in bigger companies, I think departments get siloed and now people don't feel comfortable going across the hall and things like that. So sometimes I find that getting unblocked is the leader's job to get that to happen. Yes?
Yeah, I find it's also that they're in like a rhythm of doing unhealthy one-on-ones. They're doing those checklist one-on-ones versus talking about what's real and what's important and what's in
Mm,
their way. And so I do think, back to the processes, if you put healthy one-on-ones in place, sometimes you can get
yeah.
to a place where you're unblocking and having those conversations that matter. But like this company in particular, they weren't doing town halls or one-on-ones, is what I found out this afternoon. And I was like, all right, let's talk about some communication
Yeah.
structure that we should have in place.
You also said that you could be doing healthy one-on-ones or unhealthy one-on-ones, right? So there's a difference there too. Sometimes I've made the mistake of just checking to say, "Hey, you do your one-on-ones, right?" And I go, "Yes," and I move on. When what you're really saying I'm learning today is actually maybe ask that one more question to see what's going on in a one-on-one, to see if they're actually having good one-on-ones, or they're just, I've done my one-on-one because I'm so busy. I can't.
Yeah. Well, and I think the second thing that I find, Patrick, is that even if they're talking about where they're stuck or where they're unblocked, they're not getting to know the person. So, I'll also be like, what do you know about your team? Or what are you learning in your one-on-ones? And they'll go through work. And I'm like, do they have a family? Do they have a dog? So I think it's important that in those one-on-ones is where some of that trust is built. So you should, don't just talk about work.
Yeah, yeah. Don't just talk about work. I live on the West Coast now more, right? I'm in Seattle, and I do find the I did find, first of all, when I moved from the Northeast to the Southeast, the pace was a bit slower, and people
Mhm.
did ask more questions about, hey, tell me about your weekend, etc. Moving across to the West Coast to Seattle, I find that the pace is also a little bit different. I don't want to say slower; it's not necessarily slower, but definitely more balanced. I find people on the West
Okay.
Coast more naturally having a more balanced life. It may be because the weather's great. It may be because I want to go out hiking. Maybe because I want to go outside, versus work. I don't know, but it seems like people in Seattle just seem to have a little bit more balance as far as
I could see that.
yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Good. So, what other lessons could you share, or would you like to share that would help our CEOs, you know, be better leaders?
Yeah, I think for me, it's the best CEOs that I've ever worked for are the ones who don't think they have all the answers. They're willing to like listen and to hear and to not shut people down because I think that they know, worked for some young CEOs who do that. And they haven't been around long enough to do that. Bob had been I think, a five-time CEO when I worked
Yeah.
for him, and I think it would have been easy for him to be like, "Oh, I've seen that. That doesn't work." And he didn't do that. And so I do think for the CEOs that are younger or older, I think it's important for them to realize that the people that work for them probably have good ideas, but the second that you shut them down, they don't share, right? It goes back to that trust, and sometimes even just letting them share the information, even if you're not sure it's a good idea, allows the space for more good ideas to come out. And so for me, I think, as I coach CEOs, that's probably the one thing I coach most is that they have a tendency to want to shut people off or shut people down or they think they know. And it's being humble enough to realize that you may not know and it's okay to say that you don't know.
I think there are a couple of things that cause that. One is that point. The second point I think that causes that is oftentimes, sometimes CEOs feel like they just don't have enough time. So,
Yeah.
hey, I don't have enough time. I got what I need, and they forget that it is actually important for the other person to feel heard, right? Lots of times when I've noticed that when people are debating ideas, it's really hard, I think, to sign up to an idea if you had something totally different and you didn't feel heard. Whereas I found that when the person gets a chance to share and go, "This is
Yep,
what I think," and the idea is heard, and then even then we say, "Hey, you know what, Jen? Thank you so much for that idea. Given our limited time and resources, we've chosen to implement these three. And I'm sorry your idea didn't get into the mix, but we did examine it." I think when that has happened, I find that people are more happy to go, "You know what? I feel fulfilled that you at least got my idea
agree.
heard, and we didn't choose it. That's okay. I can sign up to work on this other thing." But I find that when they don't get a chance to express themselves, now sometimes they sign up with a grudge, almost like, "My idea was better, man. You just dismissed it." And maybe the CEO or the leader didn't dismiss it. This is what I found oftentimes. They didn't dismiss it really. They just didn't have enough time. They got there. It's like, I figured it out.
Right.
Thank you for sharing. I got it. But they didn't take the time to make sure that other people got it as well, because time is precious. So that's kind of my
It
learning.
is.
You got to take that time
Yeah,
to,
I
to
agree.
rest, right?
Yeah, I think so often we skip the step of making sure that the employee's loop is closed, that
Yeah.
they understand like why the decision was made. And we've just already jumped 20 light years ahead, And so, yeah, Patrick, I think you nailed it.
Yeah. I've noticed because fortunately for me, I've lived and worked for many, many years now, right? I'm 62 this year, by the way. So
Yeah.
I've seen like things shift, and this is what I think I've noticed. Right now, we have more thinking employees than we did 20 years ago. In other words, 20 years ago, employees would be like, "Fine, tell me what to do and I'll do it." Okay, they didn't
Mhm.
ask why as much. So today, good news is we've got thinking employees, more people thinking and use, and that's why things are moving quicker. That's wonderful. The price for that though is thinking employees ask more questions. Thinking employees want to know the why. And I think that is today, if our leaders would slow down a little bit, we would truly get more done. Because if we understood that you can make a very simple choice. You either go fast by yourself
Yeah.
or you go further with your team, right? You just slow
Yep.
down a little bit, help your team understand the why, you go much further. And I think that's because we now have more thinking employees, and therefore people want to know why. They have to know why. Otherwise they can't think enough, right? So that is one thing I've noticed is a change over the last 20 years.
Yeah, I just had a company that had really good EMPS scores drop like a rock. And they had made some pretty tremendous changes. But when we did the focus groups and kind of dug into like why did the employees get so disgruntled so fast, Patrick, you just nailed it, right? Like they made all these changes, but they didn't tell the employees why, and the employees didn't understand why they made the changes, so they weren't in agreement with the changes. And I agree with you. I think 10 years ago, I worked for companies, the huge companies that made huge changes. They never told us the why. Everybody just did it. But that's not the workforce today. And so now I'm trying to get that organization to understand that they did. I mean, they were like, we communicated. I'm like, all you did was communicate that you were on this mountain, but you didn't explain to the employees why we were no longer on this mountain and why we needed to be on that mountain. You just said, hey, we're here. And I don't think employees are okay with that anymore. Like, I think they want a whole lot more information than what we used to have to give them.
Yeah. And the good news is if you were to slow down and provide that information, oh my goodness, you would
Mhm.
go so much further. Like
Oh,
employees
for
would
sure.
would come back with ideas that you never even thought of. So even for myself, I find myself reminding myself, Patrick, you got to slow down. Not not because the employees are slow. No, because I've turned this idea in my head 100 times already. So I explained to you one time, I expect you to get it immediately. That's not going to happen. I mean, I've had the privilege turning the idea over my head 100 times. Why do I only insist that I only have to share it with you once and you're supposed to get it? So it's not that employees are slower. It's just that you, the leader, have had the opportunity to think about that many, many times, and now you're expressing it for the first time. So yes, I think it's critical for team health and employee health as well to help everyone understand why. I love how
Yes,
you said
sir.
it. We went from this mountain to that mountain, and you told me that, but you didn't explain the why. Why is it important for us? Why is it meaningful for us? And why did we make this change? So yes, we gotta explain the why more. Wonderful. So hey, this podcast, I can
Yeah.
talk to you forever, Jan. We've been friends for a long time, but But we're coming to close of our podcast. And for this show, it's all about helping CEOs have a more joyful and successful life. So what last piece of advice would you like to leave with our audience for them to have a more joyful and successful life?
Yeah, Patrick, I think it took me a while to figure this out because I was a people pleaser. But I think that shift to go work for smaller companies allowed me to kind of drop the pretense and figure out who I really was and be authentically me. And
Mm,
I will tell you, I've found so much joy in like 2.0, right? Of working with smaller
Really?
companies and the fact that I'm just me now. And I don't feel like I have to show up in an HR, blue pinstripe suit anymore. And I think the CEOs that I've worked with that are joyful are the ones that are themselves and allow the employees to see them as their real selves instead of, kind of putting on a pretext of, I've got to be the CEO. And so I
Yeah.
would say you live the most joyful life when you're you. Like just be
wow.
you. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Jen. So, Melissa, back to you.
Yeah, Jen, thank you so much for joining us
Yeah,
today
thanks.
and sharing your insights on ways to build healthier organizations, stronger teams. I don't know about you, Patrick, but we love Gen 2.0, man. And thank you for everyone listening out there. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to subscribe, share it with another leader, but join us next time for another conversation about what it really takes to grow, lead, succeed, and be joyful. Until next time, bye now.
Thank you.
Thanks, guys. Bye.